So I'm Briton Smith. I'm the director and designer of Family Type. Family Type is essentially a type foundry, but we also sort of do other type-related projects. And basically, are sort of looking to use technology and type together and sort of see what experimental stuff we can do. So yeah, I was previously worked in sort of design and branding. I co-founded another studio called OMSI, and then I sort of left and founded Family Type, which I've been doing about a year now. So Universal Sans, it's like a typeface that it's highly variable and customizable. And the idea was really to create a typeface that designers would have more control over, and they could then customize it so they could use it in different projects and it would be bespoke to that project. So essentially there's kind of like two components of it, or three components really. There's a typeface, there's a sort of web interface where you can kind of control and tweak variables of the typeface, and then there's like a back-end sort of server-side program, I guess, that sort of takes these selections and then generates the fonts that people can then download and try. There was a few sort of aha moments, I guess. I mean, as I said, my background in design and branding, I think that I'd sort of spotted a need for that. I felt like in a lot of projects, people are looking for a typeface, and what that's currently available on the market kind of isn't quite right for one reason or another. And we're talking about sort of small differences. If they could change this detail or that, and then maybe it would be perfect for the project. And so I guess, yeah, seeing that sort of need in the marketplace. And then when I sort of was working in my own studio, we're doing a lot of custom typefaces in these branding projects. We sort of felt that added a sort of level of bespokeness that was missing from a lot of, I mean, obviously branding projects are bespoke, but you're choosing a typeface that's off the shelf. And for me, that kind of didn't quite feel right a little bit. Like if it could be entirely bespoke, that would feel like a more natural and sort of unique branding solution. So sort of seeing that as a sort of need to customize type was kind of not really as widely used as it could be. And the reasons for that being it takes quite a long time to do, and therefore it's quite expensive. So with a typical branding projects, they don't really have a few months to sort of like sideline the project while they develop a custom typeface and then go back to the project. And even at the outset then, they don't really know whether what's going to be developed is actually going to be the perfect fit. It's kind of taking a bit of a leap of chance. So I guess the idea was to try and streamline that process a little bit and see if there's a way that we could create a solution that was sort of instantaneous, so you could see what you were getting. And then that would reduce the lead times and that would reduce the costs. And so then this sort of base typeface could be tweaked this way or that way and customized to make it unique to the project. And so I kind of felt like there was nothing really that answered that brief. And for good reason, I guess. Like most custom typefaces are sort of designed from the ground up, and it's a lot of time. And I mean, there's a lot of creative and technical aspects of designing a typeface that sort of need to be overcome. And so I guess the challenge was then how could we kind of design a solution that did that on the spot. And as I was speaking about earlier, there's the sort of creative aspect of it and the letter form design, but there's also the kind of mastering process, and we had to kind of figure out how we could automate that and make that also happen on the fly so that it could be delivered instantaneously. So that was sort of the genesis for it. I guess also I'd spent a lot of time, in these roles in branding and sort of as a type designer, designing a lot of sans serif typefaces and other ones, but a lot of sans serif typefaces, because that sort of is where, I guess the zeitgeist is and the sort of market is. So a lot of the new typefaces that are developed fit into that world. And I think the more I designed, the more I understood the space, I guess, and what kind of connected and differentiated different styles. And that was probably, maybe the main sort of insight is trying to, understand and kind of develop a system that would kind of connect these diverse styles into one sort of typeface. So yes, that was sort of like the big challenge, I think. That was, and I don't think that had really been done before. I think that's the kind of, probably what I would see as the most innovative aspect of it, is to kind of, rather than designing a typeface that has sort of one instance and iteration, it's designing a a kind of system that can then be kind of pushed and pulled and tweaked, and to kind of create stylistically like independent typefaces, all from sort of one framework. So I think I kind of had designed, I'd been designing, a lot of these sans serif typefaces, and then I sort of had the idea, well, if I could design this sort of framework, then that would mean I could go to branding agencies, design studios, and I could say to them, hey, we have this product, we can drastically reduce the lead times and the costs associated with custom type. You have less options, but it will kind of be, built from the similar framework. And so I thought if I could kind of create a tool that I would use internally to kind of like generate the kind of base for each one of these typefaces, and then I would take that away and customize it further for the clients. So then I sort of, that was the, I guess the kind of, that was the first product idea. And I sort of had developed that to the point where it was kind of a workable internal solution. But the more I played around with it, the more sort of fun it was, I guess. And the more I thought it was entertaining and quite useful. So then I kind of pivoted the idea a little bit and thought, well, maybe I could actually make this usable by designers rather than just a sort of internal solution. And so then with the sort of typeface, prototype working, I set about thinking, how could then I develop the sort of user interface for it, and then the sort of, as I said, the server side solution that would kind of tie that all together and then like generate the fonts for people. So each one of those three components kind of had hurdles to overcome, and I think they were each challenging in a different way, and they sort of happened. They kind of all had to happen together at the end. And maybe we'll get into this, but that was when I'd been working with these guys from Too Much before, who were really good at the sort of like web development and sort of programming side of things. And so then I sort of enlisted their help to, develop the idea of what the sort of user interface could look like, and then how that would sort of tie together with the typeface, and then sort of back-end server stuff as well to kind of generate them. And sort of I guess each of those three aspects hadn't been done before, so it was kind of a question mark of how we would achieve each one. And then having the sort of typeface in place, and then having the user interface in place. The final hurdle was getting that sort of server-side programming, because the mastering process with typefaces is, it's sort of done by hand for the most part. A lot of people write scripts that they'll do, like sort of operate on the machines internally. But it is a long and laborious process, and there were sort of like risks and challenges, but and kind of automating that, which involved sort of writing some new codes and scripts, and then sort of making sure that they were like fail safe and generating the typefaces in a sort of high enough quality that they wouldn't be production ready. So that was the sort of final step, and then sort of until we got to that final hurdle, I was kind of unsure whether it would really work and come together. And up until that point, it possibly would have like remained an internal tool. Until we were able to overcome that last bit. Previously, I'd co-founded a design studio where I was working, and but then while I was there, previously co-founded a design studio, and at the same time sort of launched Type Foundry on the side. And so this was kind of, I was doing a lot of custom typefaces and a lot of typefaces that we would then sort of sell on a e-commerce platform. So there was already that sort of work stream there, and this was kind of like an extension of that, I guess. I kind of could see I could sort of see the gap in the market for it, and the co-founder of the design studio I worked at, James Omsey. So he was there working more on sort of branding projects, but I guess I would still talk to him about some of these ideas. And then the Too Much guys, we were sharing a studio at the time, so sort of they were there. I guess a lot of it sort of was, a lot of those first stages was sort of an internal thing, I guess. It wasn't until I sort of had a prototype ready that then the Too Much guys kind of like helped me turn into the web application. Could kind of other people really see what it was and what it, how it would potentially work. So it didn't just, it was just, it didn't necessarily need to be pitch to anyone, I think, you know, as I sort of said initially, it sort of started off as almost like a, you know, internal sort of tool that, you know, would just help us design and sell more custom typefaces. So it was kind of, I guess that's the thing with a lot of typeface development is, you know, you're sort of developing it, and then, you know, you're hoping that in the future it's successful, and then that will kind of recover your costs and development and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, unless it's a custom job for a client, then you're taking that sort of time and risk yourself at the outset. But yeah, so it wasn't necessarily like pitch to anyone. I shared it with other sort of designers and associates that sort of I knew and trusted as it went along, and kind of got their feedback on it. I designed the typeface, and yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I designed the typeface, and then I sort of sketched out the UI, and then I took that to the Too Much guys, and then they were sort of instrumental in taking that and like making that a reality. So they sort of did, I guess, the design and development of the website, and then the server side stuff was myself as well, with some help from another sort of type guy that was familiar with this. There's a lot of sort of like terminal and Python scripting that I sort of needed to check over, but essentially it was myself and the Too Much guys, Ben and Malone, and they did the design and development of the website, and then I did the design and development of the typeface. Designing a typeface that had that range of flexibility was quite a challenge. I think, you know, other people have tried to create font generators in the past, and that in my view, maybe they've sort of fallen down because they've tried to kind of cover too much of a range, and kind of, I guess, in order for it to hold together and kind of, you know, be like a useful, workable typeface, you kind of need to follow some typographic rules. So, yeah, I guess identifying all the sort of similarities and how different letters related to each other and would work together, and which ones would conflict with which other. So, like, kind of like making sure we weren't giving too many options to the end user that could kind of break the system and create a typeface that wasn't really, you know, adhering to these typographic principles. But there's a lot of sort of like different rules that are like, you know, inherently in the typeface, and ways that different letter forms move, and how they're kind of connected to each other. So sort of, I kind of like designing a typeface that did that is a different task to just designing a typeface that has sort of one iteration. And that's quite sort of like, I guess, a nuanced solution, and like, and thinking about which things would push it too far and make it look, make it not really work. I think with type design, you know, I mean, it's purposefully limited in the range. It's sort of like, and how much it sort of tackles. So it's a sans serif only, and, you know, that's for the reason that we could kind of have this gamut of styles, and still kind of, yeah, create it as like a robust typeface. So I think that kind of, yeah, identifying those and working within those was quite a kind of challenging, quite a challenging task, and just making sure that, yeah, we weren't giving options to people that would then conflict with other things like that. Other parts of the axes, so there's multiple axes, but some of them are more straightforward and kind of like linear, when it's talking about like how much of the weight of the typeface would change, how much of the width of it would change. You know, these are things that you can kind of draw a line from A to B in. But another one, which is the way that the terminals sort of change, is they sort of transition through 90 degrees. And that's not like a linear sort of movement. So it needed to have like keyframes the whole way through. So the sort of size of the typeface and the amount of typeface design, you typically design two ends of the extreme, and then you interpolate the instances in between. So if you have two different weights, but then if you also have two different widths, then you go from 2 to 4 masters every time it doubles. So yeah, so that's, I think, that one. And then I think in terms of the server-side programming stuff, that was just quite a hurdle in terms of making sure it would do everything we wanted, because yeah, that sort of hadn't really been done before. There's other solutions out there that will achieve similar things in terms of they'll create a static instance of a variable typeface. But there was a lot more we needed to do in terms of taking the kind of full typeface and then condensing that down just into the selections that the person had chosen, and then sort of delivering that instantaneously. So that involved quite a lot of steps. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it does answer a need that there's nothing else out there that offers this. So I think sort of seeing that and kind of bringing that to life just as the whole package. I feel like that was that's been quite successful. Yeah, I think the design of the typeface that was able to, as I say, sort of stretch and cover that range is that was I think sort of achieving that was quite a challenge, and sort of finding that just kind of like sweet spot, which was like the middle ground, which could then push and pull in each direction. I just think that was quite a challenge in terms of type design, and quite sort of proud of how that came together, and how that when I see the different instances of people using it, and sort of see it in use, I think that's I'm quite happy with how that's turned out and how sort of like polished, and I think that the outcomes of the generator are. Previously, if you were sort of setting out to design a typeface, you would have to implement these changes across all these groups of letters, and then try it out, and then sort of like get a feel for it. Whereas like with this, you can kind of like tweak that on the fly and see things change. So just I think it sort of opens up a different way to kind of experiment and design with type that previously wasn't there. I think I was always like felt like it would be successful as the sort of internal tool that I spoke about, because even if it was half a success, I still felt like that would have been useful. But when we launched it, there was definitely a good response on people on Twitter, or just people that saw it and were kind of impressed with how it worked. So I think it's been more successful than I expected, and I think just when we launched, that was kind of like seemed apparent quite quickly. So since it launched, we have iterated it a few times, and that was sort of always the objective as well. I mean, thinking about a typeface is rarely a piece of software, but often there's sort of like static releases, and the idea was also that we would be able to kind of like tweak it and change it, and it was sort of an evolving thing rather than just a snapshot at one point in time. So since then, we've put out a few sort of minor releases, which have included more character options and just tweaked things that perhaps weren't working as well at the start, and refined elements. We've also launched it. Previously, it was just the upright, whereas now we've launched it with the italics as well. And we'll sort of, the plan is to continue doing that, designing the kind of next iteration, which is just expanding the amount of variability. And I expect that will keep happening. I think there'll be more releases in the future. We'll also sort of, I'm halfway through designing this universal serif, which is like an accompanying sort of version for serif typefaces. And what's happened since the project was launched? There was a bit of a couple of articles and things written about it at the start, which was cool to see it get a bit more exposure. As I said, sort of I got a really good response on the online things, Twitter, Instagram, things like that. And I can see that in sort of the web traffic. I mean, there was tons of people that visited it in the first couple of weeks, and that's remained pretty steady. I think also typefaces probably have like a bit of a gestation period, and I mean, maybe it's not, if a designer sees a typeface and uses it in a project, it's still probably going to take a month or two before that progresses to kind of become reality. And so initially we saw a few sort of smaller companies or freelance designers using it. But as time's gone on, then we've kind of seen more of a response from bigger companies and bigger teams where they're using it, and they're kind of they're liking it and wanting to use it in a commercial project. So the response has been really good. I think obviously the D&AD award will probably have a big impact, I think, on just the level of exposure.